In the previous couple of videos, we created some virtual machines to run the UCD server on. We deployed that UCD server using Docker. We used that UCD server and configured a few agents, again using Docker, so that the server had. In this exercise, we're going to use the UCD server to actually deploy some Docker images on an on-premise computer and ICS, IBM's Container Service. You can see where we left off. We had two agents configured. One was called ICE agent, where we're going to execute the ICE commands for IBM the Container Service, and the other one was just Docker commands. If we go into the templates, we can see that there are a few different templates. There's the ICS templates, some Docker templates. The ICS templates are used if your Docker images are in the ICS registry. Now, the images that I'm using were built and using the development pipeline and have been pushed out to the ICS registry where they currently reside. And we're going to run one of those, the the tracker program on ICS. But the tracker data layer is going to be an on-premise program. Well, first, let's create a component for the tracker data layer, the tracker DL. Since it's on the ICS registry, we're going to have to access that using our ICS key. Remember, our key came from the Bluemix Container Service. Since we have a few components that are going to be using the ICS registry, I think we'll just store this in one spot as a system property. Notice you can store it securely if you have a security issue that requires masking those credentials. Back to the tracker DL component. Now you can see that we're configured correctly, since we have the ICS key that's going to access that property. Let's click on the Versions tab. And then import the new versions. It can be helpful to look at the output log and see how it's processing. It looks like it found the version of the tracker DL, and if we refresh this page, we'll see the results. Notice the latest component version has been created and is now ready for us to use. Let's go ahead and create the tracker component as well. It comes from ICS, so we'll use the same template, although this one's going to be deployed eventually on ICS instead of an on-premise Docker host. So we give it the name. Notice it's acme/tracker. The component name matches the Docker image name. And we use the same key because we need to access the ICS registry to pull the versions. I feel like I've gotten a little ahead of the game. Let's log into Bluemix and take a look at our container service. So I've got the Acme Container Service already created. The way I created that was to click Add Service, search for containers, and there it is. That's our containers experimental. I clicked on that and created the Acme Container Service. Okay, going back to the container service, the Acme Container Service, you can see it's got my relevant information here, the registry and the key. It's got a few containers that are already running. In fact, Acme Tracker is already running. We'll see that again in a moment. And then we can see the images. I'm going to sort those by their image names, and you can see that there's a Tracker 1.2, 2.0 and latest, as well as the Tracker DL latest that we already imported. So we were in the process of importing the versions, the component versions for Acme Tracker. Let's continue that operation by clicking on the Import New Versions. There were 3 versions that have been imported now. Those match the versions that we saw in the Bluemix Container Images tab. Let's add the Tracker DL component to the on-premise Tracker DL agent. And we can add the Tracker component to the ICS agent. Let's create an application, Tracker app. And create an environment. We'll create the environment Hybrid Tracker for ICS and on-prem. In the application, let's add the 2 components that we're going to deploy. In the environment, let's select the environment. And then we'll add the base resources to the environment that have both the agents and the components that are going to be deployed on those agents. We can adjust the deployment of the 2 components on the component environment settings. Remember, the Tracker DL we're going to deploy onto the on-premise Docker container service. We're also going to remap the port. We're going to use 9080 to get at this Docker DL instead of its standard configuration. Let's configure the Tracker component now. It's going to be on ICS. We need to set some environment variables for this component Tracker to find the Tracker DL component. We need to give it the host IP address and that 9080 port number. Alright, we're ready to try it out. So let's open the application, go to the components, and we'll look at the Tracker DL. Will run on ICE with a dynamic IP binder. In this case, we're going to pull and run it on a Docker host. There's only one version that could be selected. Looks like execution has completed. It appears as if 2 steps failed, but in reality they didn't. Those 2 steps are to stop and to run. And to remove. And since Docker this image had never been run on this computer again, there was no need to stop and remove it. We can see that the run worked correctly. So this was thumbs up. The Docker DL program has successfully deployed. Let's just check it out and make sure it actually happened. I'm going to go ahead and log into that computer that contained the tracker DL agent. And notice it has the agent, but it has a new container that is running as well, which is the tracker DL component. And look, the port's been mapped correctly to 9080. That's the one we just deployed using UCD. Now that we've got tracker DL deployed, let's deploy the tracker program. We're going to choose the same environment. We're going to run on ICS this time, and we're going to allocate a dynamic IP address. Let's choose version 1.2 to start. It looks like it's completed. We can see that remove and stop were successful in this environment because I have run in this environment before. And we can see that the IP address in ICS was dynamically bound successfully. It looks like it should be end in 174. So here's the previous value of Acme Tracker. Notice it was in the shutdown state. Let me refresh. Well, we can see it's now in the build state, so it's on its way. Well, 174 seems to be the public IP address. This microservice is ready to use.